Hello guys and welcome back to FatbossTV. Today we're having a look at another boss from the alpha. We're having a look at Chronomatic Anomaly in the Suramar Palace.
Yes, this looks to be the second boss in the instance according to the incomplete dungeon journal, so it's a bit of a guess really, but it is a single phase fight that takes place in a large circular room with a pillar of Nighthold energy in the middle. It looks absolutely awesome. Now the fight revolves around the concept of time. The boss will slow down and speed up time throughout the fight. This will cause abilities to come out at varying rates and debuffs to have vastly different durations. It also slows and speeds up movement speed, cast times, cooldown durations, and even the ticking rates of dots. The rate in which time slows down and speeds up seems to be set, meaning that the boss, as an example, will always slow down or speed up time at a set point in the encounter. With boss timers, this means you should be able to plan around the varied time flow and have some strategies in place for each time it comes in. However, we didn't have that and it always caught you out.
So apart from having a DeLorean, what else does the boss do? Well, for your tanks to worry about is a dot that initially only lasts for 2 minutes. This dot stacks up and up and up, and if you get 9 stacks, you'll explode, which deals a crazy amount of damage to the raid, and then you just flat out die. However, you do need to keep the whole idea of time flow in mind, because the debuff may stack quicker, or even have a shorter duration, or a longer duration. It's just all over the place. It does appear to stack up pretty slowly as a standard, and there are like certain intervals in the fight where you do have ample opportunity just to do a tank switch or even let the debuff drop off completely. The boss also does something called burst of time. This just marks the locations under certain players' feet. After a couple of seconds, these marks, these little circles, will explode and just deal a large amount of damage to anyone stood inside them. So simply you just need to move away from them. However, again, time affects these. Sometimes they explode really quickly, sometimes they take forever to explode. Simply just react fast and you don't take any damage. Now, the most potent ability that the boss does is something called Time Release. This just applies several debuffs to several players, and again, I'm going to use that loosely because right at the start of testing, it was on everyone, and then like towards the end of testing, it was on like 3 people. And all it is just a debuff that is simply a healing absorb debuff. It's very similar to the debuff on Tyrant Velhari. Once the duration runs out, the players will explode and deal equal amount of the healing absorption left on the shield as damage to the entire raid. So if you only heal 100k of the 300k debuff, the 200k left will explode and hit everyone. So the idea is that you need to heal these people up, remove their debuff so they don't explode. And if they do explode, you need to make sure that you've removed as much as you possibly can.
And once again, the duration of the debuff seems to be varied. So if time is faster, you have less time to heal the shield up before they explode. However, to kind of counteract this, your cast times are faster, so you should be able to heal them up before, everyone explodes and you instantly wipe.
Alternatively, you could even use a healing cooldown at this point. That's what we tried to do. We tried to save the healing cooldowns for the points where the durations are really, really short, and that seemed to, again, kind of compensate for the fact that they are so short.
Another mechanic the boss has is something called Time Bomb. This is a debuff placed on a couple of players that has a fairly long duration as standard, but it can be ridiculously long if time is slowed down at that point. When it expires, the players will explode, either dealing damage to all players within line of sight, as suggested by the tooltip, or all players within 10 yards, which is suggested by the dungeon journal. It wasn't entirely clear, because there's so much AoE damage going out on the raid anyway, and the explosion damage from this is pretty shit, it was kind of hard to tell whether or not it's even hitting anyone anyway. One important thing about when it does time out is that it will leave a pool of goo underneath that player. It's a fairly small amount, however, it does deal quite high ticking damage, and it slows your movement speed by a lot. So once again, depending if it is line of sight, you want to go around the pillar and hide it there, or if it is 10 yards, just make sure you're away from anyone else and just don't place the goo in a bad spot. Now, one of the main things your group needs to focus on is 2 different types of adds that spawn in the encounter. One type is Depleted Time Particles, and these adds spawn in large packs, and all they do is spam cast a pulse. This will deal damage to a single player, but it will deal splash damage to anyone within 4 yards of that player. So of course, when these guys are active, you do want to be spread out. However, when these depleted time particles reach low HP, they'll continue to cast this ability. However, it will now target everybody in the entire raid, and once these guys die, they'll explode and deal a fairly large amount of damage to the group, and you have an absolute shit ton of them. Because of this, it seems like the best form of action is to try and single out one ad from the pack and take it down. If you AoE all of these down equally, they'll start dealing a huge amount of AoE damage when they're on low HP, and then they'll all explode when they die, dealing a huge amount of burst damage and definitely wiping you. That on top of other mechanics such as the healing absorb shield from the time release, you can easily see how this is going to wipe you if you deal with it incorrectly.
However, the encounter doesn't really give you much time to deal with these, as you need to focus on another type of ad, which is the waning time particle. Now, 2 of these ads will spawn, usually quite far away from each other, around the pillar of energy in the middle of the room. Now, these ads don't do anything apart from continually cast an ability called Warp. This is an interruptible cast that just deals a flat amount of damage to everyone in the entire raid. However, each successful cast of this spell increases the damage done by these ads by 20%, and this just stacks up and up and up. So what you need to do, really, is kill these off first before the warp stacks get too high, and try and interrupt them. Initially, what we were doing is only killing one and only focusing on getting that one down first before moving over to the other one, which meant the other one was literally just stood there constantly spamming warp, getting more and more stacks, and dealing even more AoE damage to the raid. So really, the best thing to do, we think, would probably be like setting up a small group of players to go over there, maybe like 1 healer and, I don't know, say 3 DPS to constantly keep it interrupted. But we're not too sure how that would actually work because of all the other mechanics that are in play. Now, when these ads die, they'll actually spawn something on the ground which is referred to in the dungeon journal, at least, as a rift. Now, players can interact with this rift and get a debuff called Temporal Charge. Now, before we explain exactly how Temporal Charge works, let's talk about Power Overwhelming. Now, it appears that the boss casts this ability on a timer, and all he'll do is he'll just suddenly turn to the Nightwell and will start channeling for a full minute. During this minute, he will no longer do any of his abilities whatsoever, but it instead will spawn a shit ton of these little orbs that just sort of spin around the room, and it feels very, very much like a Lysrazor from Firelands. Now, because there's no other abilities going on at this point, and time doesn't seem to be changing whatsoever, it's a great opportunity for your tank to either swap or for them to just completely drop their stack. It also gives you an opportunity for your healers to calm down because you no longer have any of those debuffs coming out. But most importantly, it gives you time to now focus on any of the ads that are left over. So whether it's the big ones or the little ones. So even though this phase looks particularly hectic or maybe even difficult because you have to move so often, it's actually a really, really good part of the fight because it gives you a full minute for everyone to calm down, for you to clear up the ads and get ready to switch back to the boss. Now, the Temporal Charge, the rift thing that spawns on the ground, if you pick this up and you stand near the boss, you'll actually jump on top of him and the boss will like absorb it. It's like a really weird animation. This will actually interrupt the Power Overwhelming channel and will also make the boss take 30% extra damage for 15 seconds. Now, this ability seems really weird because if Power Overwhelming, if the full cast goes off, the full 60 seconds or whatever it is, there's no punishment for your raid whatsoever, so the interrupt mechanic built in with this Temporal Charge seems a bit irrelevant.
Yeah, it's because the ads just have so much HP, you need that extra minute, well, at least we did, to just try and catch up. It was a really nice time to catch up. Yeah, you're moving a lot and people might be taking a bit of damage, but it's far less deadly than if you just instantly interrupt the boss, because when you interrupt the boss, you'll spawn more ads and you'll just get further and further behind. So even though you have this ability to interrupt him, it seems like a bit of a red herring because you don't particularly want to interrupt him, at least in this version of the encounter, because you just want to spend all of that time killing off the ads and trying to control them. Even with that extra minute, some of the little ads still weren't dead. We were still trying to work on getting them down because they just have so much fucking health. Now, of course, you can still use the Temporal Charge to try and interrupt the boss, maybe on the last couple of seconds. That way you still have the opportunity to apply the 30% damage taken debuff to him to get some extra damage out on the boss. That's kind of like a bit of a min-max thing, so you can maybe kill the boss a little bit faster. But after he's finished his Power Overwhelming, the fight seems to repeat. Now, we didn't have all the time in the world to test this boss because the servers were just being a big old pile of shit, so the fight might change up a fair amount later on with like different ability overlaps and of course the time changes that might require different strategies, but the whole fight pretty much seems avoid the very basic mechanics and just kill ads. Kill the big ads as soon as you can, kill the little ads in a staggered fashion, and just dodge the orbs during the Power Overwhelming phase. And that's pretty much the basics of the fight of what we saw. Blizzard do plan to test this boss again, and to be honest, it really does need testing again because a lot of things are out of whack for this fight.
And yeah, I agree, it definitely does need to be retested. I think that the time mechanic, although it's a really, really interesting concept, I don't think it's been executed that well. It does seem initially, at least, a little bit confusing. Maybe with more testing, you'd actually work out why it's there. I think they could have executed it far better if maybe time initially is really, really fast, and just over time it gets slower and slower and slower until he goes into the Power Overwhelming, and then it gets faster again. But if you decide to break the Power Overwhelming phase earlier using the Temporal Charge, maybe time is even faster.
Yeah, you can maybe be benefited, because of course, if you interrupt the Power Overwhelming, at least right now, it's nothing but punishing. You want to have the Power Overwhelming, although, as we said, it's very high movement, it seems like the right thing to do. There isn't a real benefit to interrupting it, unless there are no ads. If there's no ads up, because of course the ads at the moment, they do have a ridiculous amount of HP. If they reduce the HP of the ads so you can kill them during the power of overwhelming, maybe you could end the phase a little bit quicker so you can just get on with the fight. The problem I would say is with the time mechanic is that the boss doesn't really broadcast the time shift in any obvious way. So doing this fight without some sort of boss mods means that you often find yourself caught out by suddenly moving like super slow or having really long casts. You don't really notice when the time shift happens, and it's such a cool mechanic. It's slowing down time, but the visuals, like your spells don't move slower. They could be doing so, I know it's probably impossible to do, but they could be doing so much more of it. Even if they just put like a bit of a grayscale across your screen to show that time has slowed down, similar to what happens in End Time on the last boss. When you rewind time, you get like a bit of a different color palette.
Although that for the entire fight might be a bit annoying.
It might be a bit annoying, but at least it will tell you, oi, look, time's changed. The only other point where you really notice when time is changing is maybe if you're hovering over your buffs the whole time, and nobody is doing that. So yeah, it just feels that when the time mechanic comes in, it's a bit more annoying rather than, oh, look how cool this is. But this is a very interesting idea for a boss. Like, playing with the whole concept of time has absolutely huge potential. And the room that you're playing in, although it is really, I would say maybe too big, because the ads just spawn in fucking like China and you have to fucking trek there every single time they spawn. It is absolutely beautiful, and even the vast distances that you have, it maybe like promotes the idea of bringing classes that do have like high movement speed mechanics and rewarding you for using those in effective ways, which in some fights you don't need to do at all. So it's a nice little extra thing that if you've got a really good raid group and you've got a really nice comp for the boss, you actually are rewarded for that. So yeah, shamans, not actually useless. It makes a nice change.
And also to top that, I think with a little bit more tuning, especially on those little ads just felt like they had far too much health. It would be a much more interesting encounter where you don't have to panic so much to deal with the ads, which is what it felt like when we tested it for that very, very short period of time. But that's all we got time for in this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to know a little bit more about our thoughts about this encounter and our time spent with him, then do check out our blog on WoW Amino, the mobile app for WoW players, who kindly sponsor us here at FatbossTV, and we shall see you in the next video.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.